Police draw their weapons in Hong Kong. Will months of protests be stopped with force, or will there be a peaceful resolution? Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Hong Kong is on the brink of becoming the next Tiananmen Square massacre. Or everything is going to be totally fine. Depends on who you ask. But it's definitely somewhere on that spectrum, between huge massacre and nothing at all. Hong Kong has been embroiled in 2 months of protests. Citizens are fighting a last-ditch battle against the Chinese Communist Party's attempt to destroy the freedoms in the city. On August 18th, a quarter of the city came out to march. There have also been a number of smaller protests, like the 10,000-person protests in Tsuen Wan on Sunday. That's the same area where men in white shirts had attacked protesters 2 weeks ago. The protesters on Sunday were largely peaceful, but towards the end a few of them threw bricks and Molotov cocktails at the police. And the police responded with tear gas and water cannons. And police even drew their service weapons and pointed them at protesters. That happened after protesters chased the police with sticks, and one police officer fired a warning shot into the air after another officer fell. One local resident, not a protester, went on his knees in front of the police to ask them not to shoot, and got kicked in the stomach. But according to a police spokesperson, that was just a natural reaction. But with the protests continuing now into their 12th week, is there an end in sight? According to this article, a prominent pro-Beijing Hong Kong legislator says he was informed by a reliable source that the Chinese military will send in troops if protests don't end by early September, which is next week. Why the tight early September deadline? Because October 1st is the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. That is the day the Chinese Communist Party defeated the KMT and took over the country. According to Michael Tian, the last thing Beijing wants to see is attention focusing instead on violent clashes or even a peaceful march involving hundreds of thousands of people here on that day. Which makes sense. It's hard to throw a party when the guests keep complaining that they don't want to be there, while handcuffed to their chairs. That's why Tian predicts that if the protests are still going on in September, either Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam will ask for the People's Liberation Army to come to Hong Kong, or China will just send in the troops of their own accord. Of course, the logic of massacring innocent protesters in September to make the party look good in October, that doesn't exactly hold. It would get the world's media attention focused on China, but as my first grade teacher used to say, negative attention is the wrong kind of attention, Chris. Obviously, Miss Armstrong didn't know what she was talking about. Anyway, Michael Tian's larger point was that the Hong Kong government needs to take decisive steps to address the key demands of protesters, and said that he personally recommends the complete withdrawal of the extradition bill and setting up the committee of inquiry. So, Michael Tian is urging Chief Executive Carrie Lam to meet the protesters' demands. And remember, he's a pro-Beijing lawmaker. In fact, many pro-establishment people have been urging Carrie Lam to withdraw the extradition bill and set up a police inquiry. But it seems like there are some things she just can't do. So does that mean the troops are going to roll in? Not necessarily. There's another prediction on the other side of the spectrum. According to the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has recently ordered Hong Kong authorities to stand still. According to an insider, Xi Jinping would not order sending troops to Hong Kong. Because, as Xi Jinping's first grade teacher used to say, negative attention is the wrong kind of attention, Jinping. Wait, Xi Jinping had Miss Armstrong too? But more importantly, U.S. officials have threatened to tie U.S.-China trade to a peaceful resolution in Hong Kong. And while Xi Jinping may not care about human rights, he does care about the Chinese economy, because he needs a strong economy to stay in power. But it's important to note that both the Epoch Times and Michael Tian's statement rely on insiders and reliable sources, so it's hard to tell who's right. But one thing is clear. Even though the Chinese Communist Party isn't sending in the troops yet, that doesn't mean they're not fighting back. From a propaganda campaign designed to make the Hong Kong protesters look like violent rioters, to having police infiltrate protesters, to encouraging violence against the protesters, to forcing companies to condemn the protests, the Chinese regime is trying to turn the rest of Hong Kong society, and really the rest of the world, against the protesters. But it doesn't seem to be working. Hong Kongers have staged a variety of peaceful protests over the past few days. From this extremely boring march involving thousands of accountants, yes, accountants, to this also very boring protest by relatives of police officers. And then there was its actually quite impressive human chain. See, 30 years ago, 2 million people joined hands to form a human chain across the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They were calling for independence from the Soviet Union. The protest became known as the Baltic Way, and those were in the days before Purell. Well, on Friday, the 30th anniversary of the Baltic Way, hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers joined hands in a similar protest. They were calling for, police to not hurt people and stuff. They spread out across Hong Kong Island and parts of Kowloon. They even climbed up Lion Rock, where 5 years ago protesters hung this banner for the umbrella movement. It looked kind of awesome this past Friday night. And it's also a pretty bold symbol that the people of Hong Kong are going to come together no matter what. And so the Chinese Communist Party might not want to risk sending in the troops for a massacre unless they're prepared to massacre millions of people. Oh, and all the journalists. All these people in yellow vests are journalists. And they'll have their cameras rolling the whole time. That'd be some serious negative attention. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. And now it's time for the last part of the show, where I pull a question out of a hat. It's a reward for the fans who support China Uncensored by contributing to us through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Joe Rue asks, is the new bridge between mainland China and Hong Kong the likely path of the upcoming invasion by the PLA? Good question. It sounds like you're talking about the new Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau bridge, which was opened 10 months ago. The bridge was designed for an invasion, but not the military kind, the economic kind. The idea was that the more integrated Hong Kong can be with mainland China's economy, the more people there would prosper and the more they'd love the Communist Party. That turned out to not be the case. But the bridge itself is too small for a military invasion and too easy to block. Also, the bridge from Zhuhai and Macau only goes to Lantau Island, and from there, troops would need to cross 2 smaller bridges to get to the new territories, which is the main landmass of Hong Kong. The best place to launch a ground invasion is from Shenzhen, which shares a border more than 12 miles long with Hong Kong. And that's why the People's Armed Police have been using Shenzhen for drills. General practice drills. Thanks for your question. And thank all of you for watching. Support our continued coverage of Hong Kong by pledging $1 or more per episode through the crowdfunding website Patreon. YouTube is demonetizing all of our Hong Kong coverage, so we really rely on your support. Go to patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.